Hey guys, I did a video a couple weeks ago about some culture shocks a friend of mine had her first day in Paris, and I got some comments that were a bit about, oh, they're so negative, etc. Things aren't so great in the US either. And I'm like, oh yeah, of course. I mean, after you live in another country for as long as I've lived in France, you definitely notice the things that you don't miss anymore about your home country. So I am a big supporter of the US and a big Midwest girl over here, but there's plenty of things that I don't miss about being in the US. And so today I'm going to talk to you about the 10 things I really don't miss from back home. So in the USA, we think we're the best at everything. We have a huge problem with a superiority complex that I don't miss at all. In France, you definitely have a subtle arrogance, especially when it comes to things that they're really well known for, like fashion or food. But it's not so in your face. In the US, we really take it one step further. I remember thinking during the presidential elections when they were going on in the US and in France at the same time, that people in the US would say things like, we are the best country on earth. And you definitely wouldn't hear that coming out of like candidates for the French president. It's just not so openly in your face. My husband is a huge sports fan. When we're talking about sports, there are like the world champions of NBA, but the NBA doesn't include all of the different world teams. It's, America and Canada. Maybe there's some other countries included that I'm not aware of, but like it's not the whole world. It's the same thing with like the baseball series. It's the World Baseball Series, but I don't think that the entire world is invited to participate in these series, but that's what we still call it. You're the best in the world. And I think the funniest thing about it is that when you look at really like national polls that are going to rate countries by how their life expectancy, their quality of life, their education, how much they're making, all of these, taken into account, the US is not number one. I don't even think it's in the top 5. It's somewhere in the list. I'll put the link below, like 8th or 9th, but we still really have this strong feeling of like, we are the best. And I have to admit that it's not something that I miss. Tips and sales tax. You've got to be killing me. So sales tax is something without a doubt I do not miss at all in the US. I hate walking into a store and picking up something and seeing that the price is $3.99 and then getting to the cash register and it actually rings up at like $4.12 because of sales tax. When it's that small of a difference, it's not that big of a deal. But when you go and buy expensive items, like I'm going to go and buy a computer that's already $1,000, and when they ring it up, it's, $1,125. Well, $125 is a big, it's a big amount of money. And it would just be easier if they would put the prices exactly as what you're going to pay, including tax when you get to the register. I love that about France. I would say when we're talking about tips in a restaurant, it's something that for the most part I really like. I like that tips are included and you don't really need to tip servers. It's not a necessity in the way that it is expected in the US. I think there is a downside to it though, that service is not based on gratuity, which means you're not always getting the best service, and France isn't really known for having amazing customer service anyways. But again, it kind of goes with the sales tax thing. It's really nice to look at a menu, see what you're going to order and what you're going to pay, and have the bill be exactly that. It's refreshing. Our units of measurement and the way that we tell temperature is just a little bit whack, guys. And when you come to another country and you realize how whack it is, I think someone had too many glasses of wine when they decided that we were going to stick to this US customary units measurement with acres and feet and pounds and inches, and it just doesn't really make sense, to be honest. You have to memorize a lot in the US when you're learning about measurements and degrees. And I mean, water freezes at 32 and it boils at 212, and you come to France and in a Celsius it freezes at 0 and it boils at 100. It's just easier to understand. And I don't really think there's much of an argument for this. I think everyone, even Americans, must think it's a little bit crazy, because there's no other, the US and then 2 other nations are the only ones that actually use the US customary units. And even within the US, there are a lot of industries that use metric units because it's easier for trade, because it makes more sense, because it's just a better way of measuring things. So it took a while to get used to it, honestly. And even sometimes when the doctor's like, how tall are you? And I'm like, oh shoot, what's the conversion from feet and inches into meters? I can get a little bit lost, but once I got used to it, I highly, highly prefer the metric unit, and I prefer measuring things in Celsius, and promise you it's way easier. The cost of healthcare in the US. And I know this can be a big debate, and I'm not trying to get into a debate. It's just my personal opinion about it. I don't miss worrying that some law is going to change and I can no longer be under my parents' insurance, and can I afford private insurance, or what happens if I were to get really ill and I couldn't afford medical care? Would I ruin myself financially? Would I ruin my family? I think that's a lot of pressure, and I do really like the fact that in France I don't have that pressure. Even just as an example, I am in my 8th month of pregnancy right now, and since I was considered 6 months pregnant in France, I'm able to go to the doctor, and if anything's wrong, it's completely, I wouldn't say free because I pay taxes for it, but I don't have to pay anything when I leave. And so I have to say that I just really enjoy the system, and I find it to be way better, honestly, than it's not perfect, but it's way better than what we have in the US. Advertisements on television, commercials, you are killing me. When you don't know anything else, you realize there are a lot of commercials, but geez, do we have a lot of commercials in the US, and it was really refreshing coming to France. In the US, on a 30-minute television show, most of the shows are actually 22 minutes, so you have at least 8 minutes of commercials. It can be more, and apparently it's on the rise now. So imagine that you've got at least 10 minutes of commercials in a 30-minute program. It's just commercials all the time. In France, there's a law that legally you can only have 12 minutes, up to 12 minutes of commercials over an hour span. So it doesn't sound like that much of a difference, but honestly, it's a huge difference. And anytime we watch American shows or we go to the US, it's one of the first complaints of my husband when we're watching TV, like, can we not get through a show without seeing an ad? And it's true, it definitely drives me nuts. Now that I've lived in France, I really do understand what people say about Americans being really loud, because you kind of adapt to the environment that you're in, and so I probably just speak at a lower volume than I'm used to. But when I am around other Americans, it's true that we are just really loud, and it's something that I don't miss, like having to shout over other people, being in a restaurant and having to shout to be heard. It's just not the same like level of noise. I tried to look online and see if I could find any reports about, what are the loudest countries where people talk the loudest. And it's hard to find. There's a lot of stuff about like the noisiest cities, which apparently Spain has like really noisy cities and people are used to a lot of noise. And the Spanish, I have to admit, are very loud. But I think that this just has to kind of depends on where you're coming from and what's relative for you. So the French just speak softer than Americans, so Americans seem like really loud, but I'm not sure if I lived in Spain that I would think that Americans were so loud. So it's just very dependent on where you live, but it's not something that I miss. Overly friendly people is something I don't miss. I'm the first to say that the French are not very friendly all the time, and I wish that they were more friendly with strangers. A little smile on the street wouldn't kill anyone. But in the Midwest where I'm from, people are overly friendly. I don't miss this. Like if you're standing in the supermarket and you're at the checkout to pay at the cashier, it's not surprising to have the person behind you be like, oh, I see you're buying, stuff for a barbecue. Yeah, the weather's not supposed to be great this weekend. Be careful if you're inviting people over. Yeah, that brand of chips that you're doing, I don't love that one so much. I mean, it's just, people are very, very comfortable with strangers where I'm from. And I guess I don't really miss that too much when I go home. It's a bit of a reverse culture shock where I feel like they're kind of a little bit too much into my business. So I wish we could find a little bit of a medium. This one for me isn't perfect in France, and it's not perfect where I'm from, and we're gonna try to make it work. The size of the US, I don't miss the size either. I mean, there's some great things about living in a big country, but it would take my family to get to the beach from where we live 14 hours by car to make it down to Florida. And we used to spend our summers when we would vacation on Cape Cod, which is kind of near Boston on the East Coast. So that's like a 21-hour drive to get there, to go to the beach. Just to say that in order to really change scenery, you've got to get pretty far away from where you are. And it's really nice living in France, where my husband's family is from Sète on the beach, and we're in Paris. We pop down on the train in 3.5 hours. If we really wanted to make it to the beach in 2 hours, we can be to the beach. There's something that's really nice about living in a small country, and I love that we're able to go, swimming one day and skiing the next day, and you can all kind of do it in pretty close proximity. I think this one depends a bit on where you grew up, but I grew up in a place with a lot of chain restaurants. So you didn't really know the owner. They were quite large. You knew that they were run by a big corporation. And I really love this idea, even in Paris, which is a big city, that I kind of know everybody in my neighborhood, and I have the restaurants that I go to, and I know the owner, and I know their family, and I know the people where I buy bread from. And, it's more of a mom and pop type of vibe that I really like. I know that you can find this in certain areas in the US, and it's just kind of where I grew up that is a bit different, but I can't say that I miss like eating at Olive Garden every night or going to Red Lobster. It's kind of nice to be like somewhere supporting my own community and, you know, knowing where I'm eating from and the people, you know, the people I'm buying from. Rules I know are in place for a reason, and the US has rules and France has rules, but the mentality of people about rules is quite different. Where I grew up, it was really a community of there are certain rules set in place, you don't question the rules, you don't debate them, and you follow them, even for like really unimportant things. I mean, that's the way that you did them. And it's just not the mentality of the French people, and I love it. If there's a rule in place, they will definitely analyze it, they'll think about it, they'll find reasons why it's not a good rule, and if they deem it to not be an acceptable rule, they're not following it. And it's nice. In the US, there's just a lot of expectations for rule following. Of course, there are rebels, but for the most part, you're following rules there, and it's really refreshing to be somewhere where you kind of get a say in the rules, and you get to decide if you're gonna cross that street when it's red or not. Thanks guys for joining me about the 10 things that I do not miss about living in the US. As you can see, there are a lot of things that I love about France. Please comment below about the things that you don't miss about your own home country. I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that have interesting things to add to the discussion, or things that I might have missed if you're an American living in France. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. Bisous!